Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Josh Wonders Why. I am Josh Annan. I'm here with Kelly Sellers, and together we make up the administrative team of this Uprooted Faith online Facebook group community, which that's probably redundant, but
I don't like the word administrative. You're the administrative person. That's one of your gifts, isn't it? One of your spiritual gifts.
It was at least last year, but I've
It
learned
is
that these
not one of
change.
mine.
Okay.
But
So we
least I
are
hope
the
it's not.
team behind the Uprooted Faith
I
online
like
Facebook
team
group.
better.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's it. And we are here tonight just for Josh Wonders Why. So if you're new to this Josh Wonders Why experience, it's a weekly discussion that Kelly and I have about a variety of topics, typically on Monday night. Just whatever's on our mind, whatever's on your mind, whatever we see in the news, whatever topics we want to talk about. And hopefully it's relevant to you in some way.
Yes, but first, let's all read my shirt. Dear Math, why can't you solve your own problems?
That's great. Unfortunately, I have no math questions for you tonight, but that is awesome. But as you know, no questions are off the table except for math questions.
Yes.
Those are ones that Kelly can't answer, or will not answer. I
Although-
won't say can't. You may be able to answer some questions.
I did answer, I can't answer the question about if I have 5 cats and somebody takes 2. What do I have? 5 cats in a body. I can't do that kind of math. Nobody's taking my cats.
Do you have 5 cats?
No.
Okay. How many cats do you have?
I have 3.
You have 3.
Yeah.
Would you have 5 cats? Is 3? What's the magic number of cats? 3?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know if there's a magic number. We can't take any more at this point.
Oh, 3
Because
is.
our oldest one is kind of geriatric at this point, and getting the 2 kittens was about did her in.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
she got physically ill.
Really?
Yes.
And they stressed
She
her
was
out too
so
much?
stressed out. Yeah,
Okay.
she was so stressed out. So she's okay now, but we can't get any more.
Okay.
That's okay.
Okay, well there you go, 3. So tonight we're gonna wrap up our discussion throughout the month of June. For Pride Month, we've been having some discussions related to the LGBTQIA plus community. We had a discussion a couple weeks ago on how the Bible defines marriage, and is there anything in the Bible that says only men and women should marry each other and not men and men and women and women. Tonight we're going to talk about something else about that I feel has been highly politicized over the past couple years by both parties. I'm not going to pick one, but it's the topic of gender identity. And it is a pretty complex and detailed topic that we're not going to go into the specifics or debate, whether you're born this way or you develop over time based off influences of the environment. But we're not here to debate that. We're here just to talk about what the Bible says about gender identity. Does Jesus give us any indication on which side God is on?
I will say that gender identity is not necessarily the same as the sex assigned at birth. So gender is a social construct referring to a person's identity and roles. So, part of gender identity is just how we see gender,
Yes.
different genders. So I think it's important to have these distinctions because gender is a social construct. Sex is the biological characteristics of a person, and sexual orientation has to do with sexual attraction that a person feels. So they're different. There's nothing, like, you can. They're not like all inclusive.
I feel like there's no right or wrong answer, but I feel like people try to take a side and say this is the only way, to define it, right? So, as you said, how do you define gender? Is it how someone sees you or how you see yourself, right? Is it based off your physical attributes? I mean, there's also some stuff that I've read that, I think the question on how female are you to be able to compete in sports has been a topic. I heard a podcast that went all the way back to 1930s, and interesting, this is a side note, but at the time, women had not been able to participate in the Olympics until the 1930s, and at that time they were allowed to do the 100-yard and the 200-yard, 100-meter and 200-meter run or sprint or whatever. And they did that, and at the end, as you probably would as an athlete, you exert all your energy, and at the end they're huffing and puffing. And one of the news articles at times like, women shouldn't be participating, they retired at the end of this run. So
the men aren't?
I don't know. Apparently not as tired as the women, right?
I mean, I don't know.
But anyway.
I don't run. Even if somebody's chasing me, I don't run, so I can't speak to it.
So it's a complex topic, and like you said, it's, it depends on someone's point of view, how they define themselves, how they define other people. Is it physical? Is it, how you feel inside? So I did want to at least acknowledge some different terms for gendered identity, right? And maybe help define that. So the first one, because I was not maybe fully aware of some of these terms, the official terms.
Right, yeah.
So the first one is cisgender, and that's just you identify as the same gender you were assigned at birth, right?
Right.
Which, okay, and then
your gender identity matches the sex assigned at birth.
Yep. And then there's transgender, which is the opposite. Your gender identity is different or opposite of what is assigned at birth.
Do you know the percentage of transgender people in the U.S.?
I don't.
Well, you're the one that's supposed to have the numbers.
You're the one that's not supposed to be asking questions.
I looked it up. It's about 1%.
1%?
Yeah.
That's in the U.S.?
Or 1.5% in the U.S.
Okay.
Of people are transgender.
Okay. Again, and it sort of goes back to the discussion we had with the biblical marriage, and I think it was, 1 to 5% of all marriages in the U.S. are same-sex marriages, and it's like, these are like small potatoes. Why is everybody going after these small corners and taking sides for this stuff? And apparently it's big issues for some people. But that's interesting. I never heard. So 1%. There's other stuff like, there's other terms like non-binary, which it's someone who they could identify as both, neither, or somewhere in between. It doesn't fall within the traditional definitions of male, female. And
if it's non-binary, and that's not just gender. Other things are non-binary.
Yes.
It's like there's not either or.
Yes.
Non-binary is not either or.
Yeah. So there's these terms, and because of this, these terms, they feed into the whole debate you may have seen recently or over the past couple of years on, pronouns. What pronouns should we be using, and, how should we be using pronouns in schools and everything else? We're not going to debate any of that stuff, but, the question really to discuss tonight is, does the Bible say anything one way or the other about how you're supposed to identify with your gender? And that's what we're here to talk about tonight. So be curious, if you have any questions or comments related to this topic, put them in the chat, and we'd love to discuss those as well. So first, what I want to do, and I sent you a list of verses we could tackle, Kelly, and maybe you have additional ones, but first I want to unpack the verses that people have used sort of to say that cisgender or identifying with the gender you're assigned at birth, that is the only acceptable identity. And maybe, these verses are used by people that argue for the traditional view of gender, that God created only male and female, and that gender identity should align with your biological sex, I guess, in a way. So I don't know how to tackle them. If you want to just go through the verses, or I guess I could just say the verse and quote it, and you can tell me. Do
you have the actual verse written out?
I do.
Okay, good, because I don't have that.
Okay.
So go ahead and do that, and then I'll throw in my 2 cents worth.
That's what it is. So first one comes Genesis chapter 1, verse 27, and basically says, so God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. So basically it interprets that God created 2 distinct sexes as part of the good order of creation. So there you have it. If that was in Genesis, then...
So it could be that nature finds a way.
Didn't you quote Jurassic Park before? You quoted that a couple weeks ago,
yes.
too.
Nature finds a way. So I will go back to we didn't talk about intersex.
Okay.
And intersex is people who have genitals, chromosomes, or reproductive organs that don't fit into a male-female sex binary. So their genitals might not match their reproductive organs, or they may have traits of both. It isn't a disorder, disease, or condition. And there are very few people who are intersex. And they can physically appear male or female, but they may not be genetically male or female. So everyone begins from the same place physically, as an embryo, and based on chromosomes, will develop one or the other genitalia. But sometimes there's a duplication in the chromosomes. So usually, XX means you're female, XY means you're male. Sometimes there's a duplication of a chromosome, and so, you may have more X's or Y's. And chromosomes are just what you're born with. Now, our daughter has a duplication of a chromosome. It's chromosome 16. And so what happens is there's just like extra genetic material that attaches. And so there are all kinds of different configurations of how that can happen, or what can happen when you have extra genetic material. So a duplication of chromosome 16, it's usually going to affect the person in like learning delays and maybe ADHD and different things like that. So it does happen. But I think this is really interesting because duplications in chromosome lead to evolutionary changes. That's how evolution happens, when you have that additional genetic material. So perhaps God created male and female, but then through the years, maybe there's been some evolution happening. And so maybe that has something to do with it.
Yeah.
So that's my really long answer to Genesis 1:27.
I was also going, so you did the chromosomes. The other thing that I heard, I listened to something about is then also the hormones, because, if you're born female with female genitalia, but then there are cases where you have high levels of testosterone.
Right.
And that's where the debate on some of the hormone testing for women's sports come in is, I'm a female, but I was just born with high levels of testosterone, and sometimes they're being excluded from matches because they're not,
and that's
those
different
tests.
than transgender.
Yes.
That's important
fair.
to understand. That's different. They were assigned female, they appear female, they identify as female, they just have a higher level of testosterone.
Yep.
Now, hormones are biological, like chromosomes. However, you can't change chromosomes.
That's fair. Okay.
Well, actually, you can do that before birth, and that's a big ethical. That's a big
ethical.
different
Josh Wonders
it
why
is.
topic.
It's a big
Let's cover
ethical
that in a
issue.
different
But hormones are biological, but can be altered by drugs. So those can be manipulated, but chromosomes can't.
Yeah. We'll come back to this Genesis 1:7 at the end, because I have a question for you, and then I'm going to come back to this one. The next one I found reference in it's Deuteronomy 22, verse 5, and it basically says, "A woman shall not wear a man's garment, nor shall a man put on a woman's cloak, for whoever does these things is an abomination to the Lord your God." And the interpretation is basically used to prohibit cross-dressing or blending of gender presentation.
All I have to say about that is I'm not giving up wearing jeans. So that's one of those verses that we don't observe today.
Do you know the background of why they put it in there at that time? Was there an issue?
Why?
I don't know.
I thought you were going to tell me.
I'm not the one that's supposed to have these answers. No, I'm just curious if you
I
know
don't know.
anything about that and why that was in
There
there.
must have been an issue.
It seems weird because there's also laws about boil a baby in its mother's milk or whatever. I'm gonna.
Well, yeah, because that's just wrong.
Okay.
That's just not.
I'm just curious what
Yeah.
the background of this law was.
I don't know, but there must have been a reason for it.
Okay.
You know, we started out with 10 commandments, and then we have I don't know how many, and like 600 or something. Somebody can correct me on that. And I think it happened because people started to question, well, what is work on the Sabbath? Oh, so we're going to have to add commandments to define that. So that's kind of how it went. Let's stop and look at these comments.
Yeah, go for it. You're probably
Cindy
seeing the comments
said,
better than I am.
God created in order to procreate because you need one of each. And that's true. God did create male and female to procreate.
Yes.
But as we'll talk about when I think in Matthew 19:12, you know, Jesus acknowledged that there are other ways to live rather than just as a married couple. Mm-hmm. So, and Ashley said, I thought God created us for more than just procreation. And I agree with you, Ashley. And you know, in the Old Testament, we see this group of people, the Israelites, and they needed to have a lot of children to build up their numbers because there's safety in numbers. So that's part of, we see commandments about that, you know, that you have to be having sex and procreating, and, you know, there are commandments about that. But, you know, there are some people who get married, but they don't want to have children. And if you don't want to have children, please don't, because that's not going to go well. And that's okay. And if you aren't married, that's okay. And I think, you know, with this push toward biblical marriage or this push toward a binary system, that it's also kind of making it, I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for? Single people are like, you know, like the Christian nationalism is pushing, you know, you got to get married, you know, it's got to be, you got to have children. And I was like, what a slap in the face to somebody who's single.
Well, then,
you know, there's nothing wrong with being single.
So didn't Paul, the self-proclaimed greatest Christian,
yeah,
didn't he brag about being single and said sometimes it's best for you to stay single?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Paul himself, the man himself, right?
He said it's better to be like I am.
Yeah.
But if you can't keep your hands to yourself, you should get married.
There you go.
It says something like that.
It's a nice paraphrase.
Yes, paraphrase.
So the next one, sort of on the same lines of Deuteronomy, is 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 14 through 15. And basically it says, does not nature itself teach you that if a man wears long hair, it is a disgrace for him, but if a woman has long hair, it is her glory? So this basically appeals to natural differences between men and women and how they should look, right? And maintaining a traditional gender distinctions in appearance and roles is what people
I just want to acknowledge that Tony's not typing fast enough, but he's on the same wavelength that we are, because he says Matthew 19:11 to 12, and then I don't think Paul was married, so
we should invite Tony in here.
I know, right?
Discussion.
Yeah. So this 1 Corinthians passage, only pagan men covered their head in worship.
Okay.
So everybody knew that. So for a man to cover his head in worship as a Christian would have been really inappropriate, because only pagans did that. And women who didn't cover their heads in public were sending a signal of availability. So that's why it was
the long hair is associated with pagan men, though? Is that why it says men shouldn't wear long hair?
Well,
At least in the verse.
yeah, and
Because I was going to ask, because I thought in the Old Testament, Samson had long hair, and because that was part of the, what is it, the oath that some men took.
right. Yeah, and
So
that's just
the-
what I was going to say. It depends on where you read in the scripture.
Yeah.
Because I believe Paul shaved his head
Well, Paul shaved his head.
because of a vow he took or something.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
this passage is really talking. You've got to understand the context of it. Otherwise, it doesn't really make sense.
Tony says he covers his head to prevent the glare, so that's another
Well,
reason
okay.
to cover your head. I mean, so, and then the last one I guess I'll get at is so Romans, verse 1, chapter 26 through 27, and essentially it says, let's see, and I probably should start before that, but basically chapter 26 says, because of this, God gave them over to shameful lusts. Even their women exchanged natural relations for unnatural ones. In the same way, men also abandoned natural relations with women and were inflamed with lust for one another. And it goes on from there. So this basically discusses same-sex behavior and basically is used to saying it's distortion of the natural order. Give them over
Right.
to their shameful lusts.
Yeah, that's what
right?
it's used for. This passage, and Romans 1 is really interesting because Paul was an expert at legal rhetoric, and he talked like a lawyer. So the first chapter of Romans is all about, how these pagans are so awful, and they do this and this and this. And then chapter 2, he says, but you don't have any reason to condemn because you all do the same things. So a lot of people miss that.
I'm sure that's what Paul loves now is you're picking my... I was
Yeah.
trying to make a point. You have to go to the next chapter to get what the reasoning was, right?
So those verses are not about gay sex. They're about lust. They're about giving into lust, not being satisfied with marital sex, and then
Okay.
seeking more sex in more places. That's what that's about.
With any type of partner.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So those are the verses I found that I was able to find that people may use to justify binary or cisgender type.
Okay. Got more comments here.
Go for it. If you want to go
Okay.
to comments, I was going to switch to the next topic.
Yeah, because Cindy said some religions women cover their hair, and that's true, and it's based on that verse or verses, and
Yeah, because
actually,
there's some places I think I've heard that, like even if you're a foreigner visiting it, like in the Middle East, if you're
Yeah.
a female, you need to be covering your
Yes.
head, right?
yeah.
You need to be aware of those.
Otherwise,
customs.
you're not getting in,
Yeah.
and it's just being respectful.
Yeah.
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 It doesn't hurt anything to cover your head. Ashley says, I don't speak Hebrew, Greek, or Aramaic. Do translations change things at all? Yes, because there's not always, it's like translating any language. There's not always a word for word translation. And you can find Bibles that are pretty much word for word translations. Good luck reading them. So yeah, in order for us to have a translation that's readable, then it has to be sometimes paraphrased, or the syntax needs to be clarified so that it makes sense. So good translations do their best to stay true to the original, but I'm sure that if we could read it in the original language, we would see what we're missing in a lot of cases. That's why I, sometimes when I preach, I'm like, here's the Greek word or the Hebrew word, and it means this and this and this. Because it may have more meanings than our English word. Or like take the word love in Greek. I don't know how many words that translate as love, but they all mean something different.
Yep.
So.
Or even the original copy before people put their own flair and opinions, and like you said, they're the scribes that would translate it, and they'd add, "Oh, I'm gonna add some more little notes to this." I don't.
Well, and not to get us off track,
Well, we're already
but
off track.
let's look at let's look at the words that people that were translated as homosexual. That didn't happen until the 20th century.
Yeah.
Because nobody used that word. Paul certainly didn't have that word. So what were the Greek words that got translated as homosexual? And if you look at those Greek words and find out what they mean, it's very interesting.
Okay.
So, and that's probably for another
Yeah.
Josh Wonders Why. But
We can table that
but
one.
yes,
Yes.
yeah.
So let's flip gears and let's go to then. There are some verses that basically are used to affirm that gender identity may not always align with the biological sex, and that basically Christian faith calls for compassion, understanding, and a space for diverse identities. The first one is a verse that we've probably cited multiple times this month for both Juneteenth, but also to talk about Pride, is Galatians 3:28. And I think I need to get this tattooed on my arm or something, but there is neither Greek nor Jew, slave nor free, male nor female, for you are all one in Christ. I don't know if we need
That's
to talk
going
about
to
this
be a
more.
really long sitting for
Yeah,
that tattoo.
I'll get my back then. How about that?
That's a lot of words.
I'll do one
So-
word a week or something, right? So I can recover. Not having that tattoo, I'm not sure how painful that
Oh,
will be.
just tough it out. Just get it done.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what's the question?
I don't know. I mean, I think that's. But reading that, you
Yes.
can interpret that as some earthly distinctions, including gender, are secondary, and the spiritual identity is higher in priority.
Yeah. Right.
To what you are.
Yeah.
Now, I'll take an aside. Galatians. So I think you preached on Galatians this Sunday. I know our church did as well. I have to go back because Galatians is like I'll just read the synopsis of what was happening at the time real quick, because I guess I need to go back and read this as a whole, because it echoes what's happening now. It basically says the Galatians have encountered a different gospel proclaimed by missionaries whom Paul decrees as agitators and troublemakers who want to pervert the gospel of Christ. Sounds pretty familiar with what's going on in today's society, right? So the verse,
There is nothing new under the sun.
history repeats itself, right? So we got the Galatians. I don't think there's anything else to talk about that because we've already talked about that one. The other two verses, I'm just going to lump them together. Both Isaiah and Matthew talk about eunuchs, which you already mentioned, and Tony mentioned Matthew 19:12, and we'll talk about that one. So Matthew 19:12 says, "For there are eunuchs who have been so from birth, and there are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by men, and there are eunuchs who have been made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven." And basically, what we can take from this is Jesus acknowledges people outside of the typical male-female binary, right?
Yeah, and the Isaiah passage is really good. Say again where it is.
Isaiah
because-
56:3-5 is what it is.
Yeah, so that's really good. That's kind of a blessing from God to eunuchs. So that's interesting. So in this Matthew passage, Jesus is saying, like I said earlier, there are different paths for people and all are legitimate.
Yeah.
So you can choose to marry or remain celibate, and that would be eunuch by choice. And in some cases, people were born who physically could not procreate for whatever reason. So that would be what he's referring to there. And eunuch is not the same thing as intersex. Most of the time, a eunuch was made that way, was castrated, and either by choice, but probably not. But like one of your favorite passages in Acts has to do with a eunuch from Egypt, I think. And
This is the conversion of Saul to Paul?
no.
Paul to
No, the Philip, who
Philip, yes.
runs to catch up with
Yes,
the carrot.
Philip. Yeah, not Saul and Paul.
And they were like high-ranking officials in royalty. They worked for the royalty. They were high-ranking because they could be trusted to be around women.
Yeah.
They could be trusted to be around the queens because they weren't going to pull any hanky-panky. So they were often entrusted with a lot of responsibility, and they were entrusted with a lot of financial
Yeah.
things. So
And that's the first that's the first I was thinking is you got these, but then there's a story of Philip, like you said, and I was confusing that with Paul's conversion, but he gets whisked away, and there's a eunuch trying to understand the Old Testament, and he says, how can I understand if no one teaches me? So it's like God's providing him, saying, hey, teach even the eunuch, about the gospel.
yeah.
The last verse I want to cover for this, which is actually maybe a really good verse as well, is 1 Samuel 16, verse 7, which says, people look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart, which I feel is good because, not everything is, what matters most to God is what's internal, and I guess you could say it's your authentic self, not your outward appearance, but how you feel, inside, right? So
How we see ourselves is just our perception, but God sees us truly as we are,
yeah,
and God sees us as beautiful creation,
yep.
and we are loved, no matter what.
So let me ask you this then: what is God's gender then?
Well, go back to the Genesis 1 passage where, God said, let us create humankind in our image. So male and female, he created them. So God must have characteristics of both male and female.
Okay.
And I also think God's pronouns should be they.
So God is not binary, right?
Because there are three persons. No, not that reason, but because of the Trinity. There are three persons, one God, and so they are, to me, it's like I've said before, it's like a community. So I think, God's pronouns might be they.
Yeah.
Rather than, we traditionally call God he. We call all the persons of the Trinity he. But if we were created in the image of God and we're male and female, it seems to me like somebody in the Trinity's got to be female in order to be created in that image.
Yeah.
I
was gonna summarize some of the stuff, but I think Tony summarized it well. I'm gonna try to say this. So Tony said in the comments, following Jesus' 2 commandments would eliminate any issues with this. We would respect everyone for who they are and quit trying to find fault and make ourselves feel better about our own sin. You cannot say you love someone if you are willing to discriminate against them or deny them basic human rights. I just lost.
Or respect.
We are all children of God, and He has a plan for each of us. So I think that's
or
perfect.
They do.
Yeah. They have a plan for each of us, right?
Yes.
So
yes.
So I guess why do Christians come out and in against this of how someone wants to identify themselves and against the pronouns? I think it goes back to the definition of biblical marriage is it goes against the norms, it challenges the norms of what they feel is traditional. And I think there's also a fear of the unknown, a fear of not knowing this, a fear of breaking social norms, and there's a fear that if they accept this, it's a slippery slope into damnation, right? In a way. So, which isn't the case, but
right.
I guess the question then is how could the church be more supportive of an individual's gender identity and not come across as, oh, you're,
Right. Well, I think Tony said it well.
Yeah.
Good job.
Okay.
I think, it's a matter of being respectful of each other.
Yeah.
You don't have to agree with everything a person believes or stands for or whatever, but we just be respectful. And if pronouns are important, then just respect that. Even if you feel uncomfortable with it, we're not called to be comfortable in this life. But we are called to love and, to refuse to acknowledge someone in the way they want to be acknowledged, I think is disrespectful. Uh-oh.
No, I was going to go
He's
to...
it's going to the scripture
I was going to go to
again.
Galatians. I've just realized I had marked the wrong...
I also think,
Go for it. Here we go.
Ashley said, we want to be judge and jury, but we aren't qualified to be either. And she also said, it's amazing how much is still so relevant from the Bible, almost like it was planned that way.
Trying to find the verse. Let's see. Here we go. So this is from Galatians as well, because this is one of the verses that I think you preached on as well. Is Galatians 5 verse 13 and 14. So, you, my brothers and sisters, were called to be free, but do not use your freedom to indulge in sinful nature. Rather, serve one another in love. The entire law is summed up in a single command: love your neighbor as yourself. If you keep on biting and devouring each other, watch out, or you will be destroyed by each other.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So I think I'm going to go back and read all of Galatians, because I think that helped me out with
It's
some
short.
of the discussions. It is. It's only
Yeah.
6 verses, or
Yeah.
6 chapters.
As Tony said, I don't necessarily understand this topic very well, but I don't have to.
Yeah.
I am called to love.
Yep.
And I think next week you should just have Tony here.
That's right. I should pull
Because
Tony
I'll
in.
be at camp.
Yeah. So that's so what with this. So appreciate all the comments, all the discussion.
Yes.
Hopefully this was enlightening or just a interesting topic to listen to. Josh Witter's Why is going to take a little hiatus in July, because you'll be at camp and I'll be on vacation, and then it doesn't work out. So the next time we'll have Josh Witter's Why is probably in August. So I'll try to find some old discussions from the archives on YouTube to post them over the month of July, just to keep whet your appetite. But if there are any topics that come up that really you're interested in, we can definitely try to knock those out in August. I think the 2 topics maybe we can cover, there's one that I think Ashley asked about early on in June, was about, I can't think of it. I'll go back and look. There's something about Adam, Eve, or Noah's Ark.
Oh, yeah.
What was
It's
it?
Adam and Eve.
Adam and Eve.
I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, why are we...
Did it really happen
like,
or not? Maybe, or
yeah.
something.
Because
Yeah.
yeah.
So let's tackle Adam and Eve, and also we maybe talk about the origins of where the word homosexuality comes from, or homosexual comes from. So, but if there are any other topics you'd like to hear us chat about, put them in the comments, and we'll go from there. And then we'll be back again live this Thursday for Digging Deep. And do you know what the topic is? Or are you still trying to figure that one out? I should have warned you that I was going to ask you about this.
We're going to be in Colossians.
Colossians.
Yeah. And in the first chapter, and talking about how, kind of how people outside the church see those of us in the church.
Okay.
You know, what would people say? You know, how would people describe us? And, you know, it's kind of specific to, you know, the churches in Colossae. And, you know, but we're a community that we don't have like a physical location. So we'll be talking more generally about how do people outside of Christianity see Christians.
That would be good. It reminded me of, one of my favorite contemporary Christian songs is by a group called Sidewalk Prophets, and it's called Live Like That. And one of the verses that I love from that probably my favorite verse, that I can get all these verses tattooed on my back. I'm just going to be like a written manuscript.
Alrighty then.
But it goes, when they see me, do they see you? I think it's
Right.
a powerful challenge.
Yeah.
Is, do you see that, am I actually living the life of God? But
Tony said, Mom always said to wear my Colossians when I go out in the rain. I think we're out now.
I think we'd end there. So thanks for all the comments.
That's all I
Appreciate
got.
the discussion. We'll see you on Thursday, and have a good rest of your week.
Bye.